Way here from Foundation Bike Fit and back for another short episode of the Cycling Demystified podcast. And today I want to give you some very easy, practical advice that you can action as soon as you have finished listening to this episode. It's something that's really easy to overlook, but makes total sense when it is explained. And if you're into saddles, like me, well, maybe I've got a bit more of a problem with saddles, but I like saddles. Maybe you like changing saddles, or you're on that journey to find the one, then you definitely need this. Otherwise, without it, you're just going to be guessing about your saddle position or your saddle selection. And if you're like me, you don't like guessing when it comes to measuring stuff. So if you're at home, put the kettle on, grab a biscuit and settle in, because we are going to talk about the saddle biomechanical reference point, or BRP. Hey, what are you talking about? Welcome to the Cycling Demystified podcast, brought to you by Foundation Bike Fit and Frequency Cycle Works, the podcast where we help you take your cycling to the next level by sharing the knowledge from experienced bike fitters, mechanics, and the hidden players from the bike industry. Alright, today we're going to talk about the saddle BRP, or the biomechanical reference point. I know. Fancy words. The bike fit world and bike world definitely has a way or habit of creating acronyms and confusion just for the sake of it, but I guess they had to give a name for it that sounded fancy, otherwise, would anyone use it anyway? Anyway, but what does it mean and why should you care? Well, bear with me, because if you understand this one aspect of your bike fit and this method, then you can take control of your comfort on any saddle. And this is the problem that we're trying to solve. The problem that a lot of riders will face at some point through their cycling journey is, how do you set the same saddle position when you are using a different shaped saddle? If you've got a good position on one saddle and you're feeling pretty comfortable, but you want to try out another saddle, how do you put that new saddle on in the same place, or in the position that is the same fit as your previous one? Now, saddle shapes vary wildly. There's a lot of different designs. I mean, that's why we've got over 150 different saddle models in our saddle library, in our studio. And there's a lot of different saddle designs because there's a lot of different butts out there. You know, there's an infinite amount of, not infinite amount, but there's a lot of different human beings out there, all riding bikes, and everyone has a different shaped bum. And if you've listened to our other saddle episodes before, you'll realize that people that sit on bikes, even if they had the same bum, if they sit in a different position on their bike, then they're going to need a different saddle. So every bum is unique, every position is unique, and so we need to find a saddle that works for that. But, you know, if you've just bought a new saddle, you want to set it up in a good position. And you know, you don't want to be able to affect the rest of your bike fit. So how are you going to do this? And it's a bit like ordering a coffee, let's say, and not being able to specify the kind of coffee you prefer. So if you live in London, like the rest of us, then the rest of us here on the podcast, then yeah, coffee culture is pretty big, and in cycling culture, then yeah, there's a lot of different coffees out there. Cyclists seem to like their coffee for some reason, but there's just so many different types. So if you like your coffee a certain kind of way, then, you know, if you don't specify that, then every time you're going to order, you're going to get something different. And sometimes it's nice to get something different, but, you know, sometimes it's not to your liking. So if you're particular about a certain thing, and I am usually very particular about my bike fit, then I want to know exactly what I'm doing, where my position is, and how to measure. So the solution to this problem of how do we get the same position on different saddles is to use a consistent point of measuring. and this is what is known as the BRP, or the biomechanical reference point. Reference point being the important part of the acronym. And where we set it at Foundation Bike Fit, now you might find this is slightly different across different bike fitters and different companies, but the principle is the same. And the principle is that we like to use a width measurement. So we usually use a pair of calipers to find where the waist of a saddle is 80 millimeters wide. And we like to use that kind of width measurement to create then a reference point. So we can draw a line across the saddle using, well, we put a bit of tape on and create a line at that kind of waist measurement point. And that becomes our reference point that we can measure from. And we like to use this BRP point because we can basically find or recreate that BRP point and that waist measurement across pretty much every saddle there is out there. Even on weird looking saddles like the ISM saddle, you can pretty much find that BRP point. And because we can replicate that BRP point on almost any saddle, then this provides a consistent measurement point that you can rely on. It's going to be the same. Now, yeah, some bike fitters will use the 70mm mark point, some saddle manufacturers use the 75mm mark point, but essentially it's all around about the same kind of area. We found that 80mm works really well and gives us the broadest range and seems to work well, but 80mm is relatively, it's an arbitrary measurement point really, but it's really the principle that is really important. So the method you're going to use is to get a pair of calipers, or you can kind of create your own template to make that kind of waist measurement on the saddle. Now, like a saddle company called Pro, Shimano's kind of component wing, actually provided a kind of template which you could cut out from the back of their cardboard on their saddle packaging. So you could create this kind of arch-shaped template which would fit over the saddle at that kind of 80mm width point. You can then get a piece of tape, put that across your saddle like a bit of masking tape, and then draw a line at that waist point across your saddle, and then you can use that point as you're measuring your saddle height, and you can now measure to that point as your reference point. And not only can you measure your saddle height to that point on the saddle, then you can also use that to measure your saddle position fore and aft, backwards and forwards, relative to your handlebars, or the relationship between handlebar position or hoop position to the saddle. Again, it's a replicable, consistent point which you can find across all saddles. And you know, just to give you an example of how you can use this across different saddles, some very popular saddles are the Specialized Power, which is relatively flat, wide-ish, but very short in length. So it's a short nose saddle. It kind of pioneered the short nose kind of saddle range, really. But Specialized also make a more traditional kind of V-shaped saddle, which is called the Roman. And you know, these two are kind of, I think they vary probably about 30mm in terms of length, but you can always find that 80mm BRP point on both saddles. So what would be quite an interesting little task for you to do would be, if you've got two different saddles, find that BRP point, line them up, and you can see how different the saddles are in terms of shape and where you end up kind of sitting. So, you know, if you've been basing your measurements, say, off the nose of the saddle, and let's again use the Power and the Roman as two different points, as two different examples of different saddles, you know, because there's such a great, differential between the nose length of those saddles, your measurements are going to be way off if you've been using the nose of the saddle as your kind of measurement point. Similarly, if you use the middle of the saddle, like again, saddle lengths vary wildly. You know, the specialized power is probably about 250 millimeters long, and the specialized Roman is almost 280 millimeters long. So, you know, if you take the midpoint of each of those saddles, you're going to end up with some very different numbers or very different positions when using different saddles. So, I'd urge you to establish this BRP point, or biomechanical reference point, as your way of using a consistent measurement point. And from there, then you can kind of recreate your position across different bikes, or just measure to the same point, especially if you're traveling with your bike and you're taking the seat post in and out all the time, so on. But usually this is the most useful method for replicating a saddle position when using a different saddle. Just some kind of notes on this. I mean, it's not perfect because every saddle is slightly different, so it's going to feel different. But this is the best method that we've got to keep kind of theoretical measurements the same. You still have to go through the rest of the testing process, but at least when you're testing different saddles, you can be more confident that you're not changing your seat height or your saddle fore-aft position drastically. So when you come to test a new saddle, you can be more confident that you're actually just testing the saddle itself and the shape of the saddle and whatever quality of that saddle you're looking to test. Where this method does fall down is probably when you're comparing a wildly different saddle. So if you're looking at comparing, let's say, an ISM saddle, which is one of the triathlon specific saddles with two prongs that stick out, and then you're going to compare that directly to a more traditional saddle like the Roman or the Selitalia SLR, then this is where you're going to run into kind of more differences, and you know you're going to have to play around a little bit more with the position. It'll give you a start point, but it's just not going to be as comparable. But most of us are going to be comparing more traditional kind of triangular shaped saddles, and so this becomes really useful. But you know, in that, be prepared to make some small adjustments back, down, forward and back on the saddle, but hopefully with this kind of measurement point and the consistency of it, then these kind of little adjustments should be pretty minimal. But you know, the goal is to give you, again, something that you can benchmark yourself against, and so you can always return to that position, you can always repeat that kind of position. You know, don't be afraid to create your own specific measurements for specific bikes when it comes to ease of measuring. Usually, for example, we like to measure saddle height from the middle of the bottom bracket all the way up to the top of the saddle where that BRP mark is. But there's no reason why you can't create your own specific measurements. So let's say you measure from where the seat collar is to the BRP point, and that will be specific for, that will be a specific measurement for that specific bike. That you won't be able to transfer over to other bikes. But if you've got one bike and that's the measurement protocol you're using for that, then you can be able to replicate that fit data on that particular bike. But again, if you want to kind of compare different bikes and different saddles, then use the BRP point, use the measurement parameters that we normally use through our bike fits. If you want to find out more about that, then I'll put a link to our article on our Knowledge Hub about measuring a bike and the method, tools and the parameters you know you need to know to measure your bike and why it makes sense. So if you haven't had a look at that, check that out. And that also has a little bit more about saddle BRP point. So hopefully that was useful for you guys. Just a real quick one this week, but an important one in terms of keeping your fit consistent and being able to test saddles more objectively and able to test the properties of the saddle themselves, rather than sticking on a saddle and then finding out that your seat height's not right and the saddle position is not right, and so you're not actually testing the quality of the saddle itself. Hope that was useful. As always, if you've got any questions, comments, feedback, give us a shout out. Get in touch at info@foundation.fit, or hit us up on the gram at Cycling Demystified, or at Foundation, the Foundation Instagram account, which is FDN_bikefit. As always, ride forth, ride safe, and enjoy. See you next time. Bye.
Suffering from numb hands, tingling toes, and any other persistent discomforts when you ride? These are all signs that your bike fit could be improved. If you're bike fit curious, get in touch with Way or Matt by emailing info@foundation.fit or finding them on Instagram at FDN_bikefit. Finally, for all your bike servicing needs, custom dream bike or hand-built wheels, go to www.frequencycycleworks.com or find me on Instagram at frequencycycleworks. Until next time, keep on spinning.